It's quite a broad question, but whilst we're waiting for some of the audience to come back in, I mean, do you have any thoughts about sort of the progress that we've had over the last year with sort of some of these government policies? Do you think there's been any sort of do you think it's addressed the imbalance between sort of the innovation in dispersed sites versus clustered, or are we have we got a lot more to go? And that's open for anybody, by the way, so not looking at anyone in particular.
I can say something on it. We looked at it in terms of the ceramic industry, that there wasn't enough in it for the ceramic industry in terms of support as well. And it doesn't go far enough, because it doesn't address the discord between all the different pieces of legislation that's out there. There isn't any big picture or proper visionary thinking within the whole thing. It just lacks that, and I don't think it satisfies industry.
I think one of the challenges that a lot of people are grappling with is the topic around scalability. We're seeing that. I think we've even heard on the panel just now a lot of really good projects and initiatives and companies taking the right steps, but it's how do you sort of industrialize this? How do you scale it? Because whilst recognizing everyone's site has its own uniqueness, which means the energy system and the strategy will be bespoke, it's a process that we all have to go through. So it's just trying to tackle that challenge of how do we do that, recognizing it's bespoke, but do it at the scale that's needed over the upcoming years. And so I suppose none of us are satisfied with the progress being made, otherwise we probably wouldn't be here. We'd just we'd just get on with it, but it's a challenge that we all want to tackle.
Yeah, I think it's definitely surprising as well. I've sort of caught myself out with that question as well, because I can't believe it's been a year already. It's yeah, already feels like time is flying by. So we've got some questions in the chat now. And we've got one here from Ingrid Bennett. So what are the possibilities for collaboration between businesses on dispersed sites? The talks today have spoken about individual organizations and how to address on individual basis. How do businesses collaborate with landlords and tenants and other local businesses, creating a local energy community? Right, well, who'd like to go first? I mean, I would plug as well that you join an excellent trade association that can put you in touch with all the relevant people, but
I think if it's okay, Chris, I've got a perspective on that. Part of what we've seen is, as Faye just referenced, the scalability. So we're seeing it already with business parks and industrial hubs, where one or two organisations are really embracing the sustainable energy approach through microgrid technologies. And you've almost got that perspective then of the neighbour kind of leaning over the fence to see what the businesses next door are doing to achieve their goals. And we've actually seen, even in a very competitive environment, a lot of sharing of best practice, particularly, as I mentioned earlier, around district heat networks. We've had sites where they're overperforming on their newer sort of thermal systems, and they're selling that energy to neighbouring properties. So there are commercial opportunities within it, but I think around certainly the landlord side of it is something we've experienced as a business. We don't own all of our sites ourselves, so it can be a real challenge, and it's understanding essentially that there are messages around business continuity that need to be addressed, and ultimately corporate sustainability goals as well. So when we're looking at sites and moving away from traditional sort of gas boilers, etc., for heating and moving into a more electrified future, we need to address that conversation earlier with the landlord to ensure that they understand, you know, how they can increase the attractiveness of their portfolio essentially going forwards. There will be some sites that get left behind, and in certain areas we're seeing that there's only a certain amount of additional power available from the grid to sort of upgrade and electrify these sites. So certainly I would say engagement with businesses local to you, understanding what's happening through local energy partnerships, but also looking for models of collaborative energy working as well. That's something we've certainly seen, is that businesses, even in a very competitive environment, happy to share their wins and their goals, because it gives them a chance to talk about successes they've had.
Any more there? I guess, Claire, do you want to talk about, I suppose that's sort of the point where the hydrogen accelerator comes in, sort of demonstrating sort of how businesses can go from one to the other.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think in all of this, demonstration is huge, right? If people can see that this has been done somewhere, then actually that's such a shortcut for everyone else to have security that this can be done. So I think there has to be a real attention placed on some of these early stage demonstrators that really needs to be prioritized. And yeah, I think when it comes to, you know, with all of these things, there's a huge number of stakeholders that has to be pulled together in order to make some of this a reality. You know, particularly when you're looking in the sort of hydrogen space, where sometimes you need, you know, you need a producer, you need an end user, you need landlords, you need local authorities, you need sometimes some infrastructure providers as well. So these aren't always simple projects to put together. And yeah, I think, you know, the accelerator will be an interesting one to see whether we can start to pull some of these together. And I think we're going to be holding some sort of networking sessions, so people who are one part of that puzzle piece can sort of come together and potentially be joined up with some other parts of the puzzle piece to try and put projects together. So that's what we're hoping anyway. So yeah, I think some of this sort of government funding stimulation can sometimes sharpen the mind, let's say, when there's an opportunity on the table to try and get some of these things moving.
Anybody want to anybody else want to come in on the collaboration point? We've got a couple more questions in chat now, so we've got plenty to go through. If not,
maybe just a final one on one thing that we found really interesting is collaborating with some of the universities, and so that whole collaboration between sort of the private sector and academia, because both have such unique strengths. And so one case where we've done this, we've set up a strategic partnership with the University of Birmingham, and then also seeing in who else can we bring along with us, whether, you know, student engagement, so talent for the future, and SMEs within that community. So that's a very locational example. And then there's also different regional hubs. So there's things like the Midlands Engine, where they're trying to aggregate what's been done across the whole of the Midlands. There's Net Zero Northwest. So there's a number of options depending on where you're located. We're trying to create those communities and networks. And the ADE.
Thanks very much. Right, got a couple more questions. Oh, here's quite a good one. How can we ensure that decarbonising industrial sites happens without simply pushing emissions overseas? So a little bit of a challenge there, but anyone want to jump in on that?
I can touch on that as well. To give you an example, we've got the ceramic sector roadmap to decarbonise, and at the very beginning of that process a number of years ago was the electrification of kilns, and you just wouldn't do it because of that cost. Andrew mentioned earlier on, one, we don't have the capacity in the UK, and why would businesses in the UK convert to electrification when it's so expensive? And the UK has got the most expensive electricity out of most of Europe and some parts of the world. And then customers are buying products from places like India, bringing them into this country purely based on cost. Now, it's well known that India use child labour and they use rubber tyres and all sorts. So the government needs to sort things out in terms of that level playing field. And to me, the government are the key player in the whole thing. They can make it happen with the right policy direction.
Any more for that one, or shall we head off to another question? We have one here from Imogen Rattle from the University of Leeds, which is, what role do you see for local authorities and combined authorities in the decarbonisation of dispersed industrial sites? Or is this an issue for national governments and businesses to lead on? So yeah, definitely tying into what we've talking about today. Anyone who wants to come in on that particularly? Or
I personally believe it has to be national. Because if you look at over the history, local authorities will tend to take different actions, and they'll take the same piece of legislation and implement it in slightly different ways and at different paces. So if it comes from national, then and they drive it from the top, that'll make the difference.
There was a piece of work last year around the topic of decarbonising heat, which had a very similar question, and I quite liked one of their findings was saying at a national level you need this overarching framework to make sure you've got the right sort of economic stimulus and you've got the drivers there for scalability, but there needs to be a close interaction and a local empowerment, because those local authorities, they know their communities and they can make the most of the opportunities. So I don't think it's one or another. I think it's the framework and then the empowerment locally.
Yeah.
I suppose you have a bit of a hybridization as well, with things like local area energy area planning coming into that, because that's sort of not quite local authority, but not quite national government either. So you're sort of bringing in an intermediary in some sort of sense. Okay, great. I think we are coming up to time, so I'm going to go for our one last question. And I'm going to go for this one, which is probably quite a nice sort of one to end on as well. What is one intervention or action that you think, sorry, I lost it. What is one intervention or action that you think would be most helpful in terms of supporting industrial decarbonisation to accelerate right now? So I think you've given this a little bit in your pitches previously, but yes, quick, what's the best thing right now?
I think in terms of government funding that's available, a lot of the organisations we work with tend to find that when they're putting forward something that is truly innovative, it takes time to develop that bid for funding, and they're often then at the point where they've missed the opportunity, where certainly for something like Salix, which can be a first past the post system where they've got fairly standard projects sitting waiting to go for Salix funding. I think there should be more emphasis of scoring on innovation and to sort of align with what Faye said around the scalability as well. What's replicable, what can be driven as a project or technology adoption. So I think the government could help and intervene in the way that they structure some of their funding systems and really emphasize that decarbonisation and innovation piece.
Yeah, and I think building on that, I mean, one thing where business thrives is where we have some level of certainty, because there's a lot of uncertainty on the sort of steps that we're making. But if we've got that time to plan and we've got the assurance that those plans are going to stay in place, then it means that we can take action on that rather than, you know, being unsure if something might change.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a few things that could be explored and put in place that some other economies are looking at as well. Things like carbon CFDs within industry, carbon border adjustments, public procurement. I think there's a few things that would be helpful in terms of, you know, stimulating that kind of activity.
Any thoughts, Michael, before we close up?
Yeah, just a quick one. To me, if they accelerate the carbon capture, use and storage journey, so if they built a grid, started building that grid throughout the UK, that will accelerate the journey for most industrial processes. And obviously it'll cost money, but I made the point earlier on about my thoughts on money and decarbonisation.
Okay. Right, well, thank you very much, everyone. What a fantastic lineup. I think that sets us up really well for the second half of the session.